I knew the moment Julian slid the sugar dispenser across the table that this coffee meeting was never really about his brother. My fingers tightened around the ceramic mug, the heat a weak distraction from the sudden sharp spike of guilt. We were sitting in a public space, yet the air felt thin and private, like a pressurized cabin before takeoff. I could feel his gaze, steady, intense, and utterly devoid of the playful sarcasm I was used to from Ryan. Julian was older, sharper, and right now his eyes were saying something absolutely forbidden. The unspoken weight of our connection settled heavily between the chipped rim of my cup and his perfectly tailored sleeve. He leaned forward just slightly, cutting the small distance, and I instantly forgot how to breathe. My life had become a series of muted tones and predictable schedules since the breakup with Ryan 6 months ago. I was Eliza, a name that felt too grand for the person currently occupying a cramped, perfectly organized apartment in downtown Seattle. My job as a data analyst was ideal for my temperament, precise, requiring focus, and demanding zero emotional input. I could spend 8 hours dissecting spreadsheets and pivot tables, returning home mentally drained but emotionally untouched. This was my sanctuary, the absence of unexpected chaos. That Tuesday evening was no different. The routine was sacred. Shed the work clothes, change into my favorite oversized knit sweater, and prepare dinner. Always something that didn't require sharing, like lentil soup or a single-serving pasta. I didn't mind the solitude, I told myself. It was protective. I had simply lowered the volume on my expectations so low that disappointment couldn't even reach a whisper. I knew the exact angle of the afternoon sun hitting the brick wall across the street at 5:45 p.m., the cadence of Mrs. Peterson's small dog barking at 6:00 p.m. sharp, and the comforting, predictable chill of the apartment lobby. Ryan had been loud, impulsive, and full of grand, unkept promises. Dating him felt like living permanently on the edge of a cliff. Now my life was flat ground, safe, if a little boring. I didn't get invited out much anymore. My social circle, mostly connected through Ryan, had politely evaporated. When they called, I always had a valid excuse ready. A big deadline, a vague headache, or the eternal classic, I just need a quiet night in. Tonight, the quiet night in was real. I was scrolling through a mindless cooking show on my tablet, vaguely aware of the aroma of ginger and soy sauce filling the small space. I was supposed to be doing laundry, but the thought of descending to the communal basement felt like too much effort. It was a comfortable sort of laziness, the kind that whispers that tomorrow is always better for important tasks. I was finishing the last spoonful of rice when my phone chimed, a text message from a number I didn't recognize, but whose name I knew instantly from the short, formal greeting. Julian. Julian Vance. Ryan's older brother. The CEO of the tech firm where Ryan used to work. The one who handled Ryan's financial messes. The one who had always seemed to view me with polite, distant tolerance. He didn't text people. He emailed, or he had his assistant call. The text simply read, "Eliza, can you meet me for coffee tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Urgent private matter regarding Ryan's old accounts." My stomach twisted. Ryan was ancient history. His old accounts were usually code for another mess. I hesitated, wanting desperately to reply, "No, I am busy being boring." But Julian was Julian, a mountain of controlled authority. You didn't say no to him. You simply showed up, paid your dues, and hoped to vanish back into invisibility as quickly as possible. I typed a reluctant, "Yes. Where?" and immediately felt the smooth, predictable surface of my life begin to crack. The next day felt tainted by the impending meeting. It was the forced re-entry into a universe I had intentionally walled off. I dressed in what I considered my professional neutrality outfit: dark trousers, a pale blue button-down shirt, and the least noticeable pair of loafers I owned. I wanted to be helpful, efficient, and forgettable. I wanted Julian Vance to look at me, get the required information about whatever mess Ryan had left behind, and move on with his life, leaving me to my spreadsheets. He had suggested a place called the Copper Mug, a low-key coffee shop near my office, which surprised me. I expected a glass-walled conference room or a reserved table at a Michelin-starred place. Julian was, after all, the kind of man whose life operated under the assumption of five-star service. This choice, however, made the whole interaction feel less like a corporate inquest and more like a necessary chore. I arrived exactly 2 minutes early. I hated waiting, but I hated being late even more. The coffee shop was warm, smelled strongly of dark roast and slightly burnt sugar, and thankfully wasn't crowded. I ordered a plain latte, paid with my card, and chose a small, uncomfortable table tucked into the back corner. The discomfort was intentional. It was a psychological defense mechanism, reminding me that this was temporary. The whole premise was ridiculous. What could I possibly know about Ryan's old accounts? I was the woman he dated for a year and a half, not his bookkeeper. I suspected Julian was simply exhausting every avenue, running through his checklist of people who might have been privy to Ryan's chaotic spending habits. I was just a box to be ticked, an informational source, nothing more. 10 minutes passed. I sipped the latte, burning the roof of my mouth slightly, and rehearsed the polite, concise answers I would give. No, I didn't know about that investment. Yes, I remember he complained about his credit score. No, he never told me where he kept his savings. I was ready to be the perfect, uninvolved witness. Then, at exactly 2:05 p.m., Julian walked in. The immediate shift in the room was subtle but absolute. It wasn't because he was loud or flashy. He was the opposite. He was dressed in a dark gray suit that seemed molded to his frame, carrying a sophisticated gravity that the other patrons, mostly students and freelance artists, simply lacked. He didn't look around searching. He saw me instantly, his eyes cutting straight through the mild cafe chaos. He walked over to the table and didn't apologize for being 5 minutes late. He simply said, "Eliza, thank you for coming." His voice low and rich, sounding exactly the way expensive whiskey probably tastes. He pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down, not waiting for my invitation. The conversation I had braced myself for, the tedious, frustrating one about Ryan, was about to begin. I adjusted the mug, feeling a familiar, dull weariness settle over me. I just wanted this to be over. Julian Vance was everything Ryan was not: composed, successful, and terrifyingly efficient. While Ryan chased fleeting ideas and lived on credit card floats, Julian built empires. He was 10 years older than me, maybe 12, and that age gap was exacerbated by the sheer weight of his professional standing. He ran Vance Technologies. He owned the building I worked in. He wasn't just my ex-boyfriend's brother. He was an economic force. He ordered a black espresso, ignoring the barista's attempt at small talk with a polite but firm nod. When he returned to the table, he placed his small cup down, the movement economical and precise. He didn't check his phone or look around the room. I had his complete, undivided attention, and it felt like being targeted by a high-powered laser. I tried to focus on the business at hand, the reason for this accidental meeting. "So, about Ryan's accounts," I started, trying to keep my voice steady and professional. "I'm happy to tell you everything I know," which honestly isn't much. Julian raised a hand, a gesture of quiet authority that stopped me mid-sentence. "Before we dive into that, I need to apologize, Eliza." "Apologize?" I blinked, genuinely thrown off. "For how abrupt my text was, and for dragging you out here," he clarified, his eyes the color of dark coffee, examining my face with an unnerving lack of rush. "I know this is uncomfortable territory. Ryan isn't handling the fallout of his departure well, and I'm trying to keep the damage contained." He spoke about Ryan as if discussing a malfunctioning piece of machinery, with distant pity and professional annoyance. I realized, watching the slight strain around his eyes, that his life wasn't just boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. It was also cleaning up the messes left by his perpetually irresponsible younger brother. That single detail, the faint vertical line between his brows, was the first crack in the impenetrable armor I associated with Julian Vance. I quickly reasserted the professional distance. "It's fine, Julian. I'm happy to help. I just want to be clear that I haven't spoken to Ryan in 6 months." "I know," he said softly, and the way he said "I know" felt too personal for a CEO talking to his ex-brother's girlfriend. He didn't press for details. He didn't ask how the breakup happened or how I was doing. He simply accepted the fact as an input into his data stream. We spent the next 15 minutes going through the logistics of Ryan's overdue company laptop and an outstanding expense report. It was exactly as tedious and banal as I had predicted. As I confirmed the last detail, Julian closed the thin leather notebook he'd been using. "That's everything on my list," he stated. I stood up instantly. "Perfect. Then I should let you get back." "Stay," he interrupted, the word not a suggestion, but a quiet command. He didn't look up, but his hand resting on the notebook was still. "The work conversation is over. Now, there's something else." My heart gave a clumsy thump against my ribs. The casual formality was gone, replaced by a dense, unfamiliar tension. I slowly lowered myself back onto the uncomfortable chair, suddenly feeling very much observed and very much out of my depth. The abrupt shift in tone felt like a physical pressure in the small space between us. I suddenly became hyper-aware of the sounds of the cafe. The milk frother, the distant laughter, all existing in a separate, less charged reality. My palms felt damp where they rested on the table. Julian was just staring at his espresso cup, rotating it slightly, not drinking. It was the silence, dense and unhurried, that unnerved me the most. CEOs don't waste time. Every second Julian spent sitting there, not discussing business, was a conscious, deliberate choice. Finally, he lifted his gaze, and I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. His eyes weren't scrutinizing me anymore. They were simply seeing. "Ryan told me you bake," he stated. The topic changed so jarring it almost made me laugh out loud. I do," I stammered, unsure where this was going. Baking was my solitary, therapeutic hobby. Sometimes. Mostly sourdough and French pastries. "Ryan said your carrot cake was legendary," he continued, a faint, almost imperceptible curve on his lips. "He used to bring leftovers into the office, and the entire executive team would fight over the last slice." I felt a faint blush of pride, instantly smothered by the memory of Ryan bringing my leftovers to his office, taking credit for my effort. "That was kind of him to share," I managed neutrally. Julian's half-smile vanished. "It wasn't kindness, Eliza. It was consumption. He took what he wanted and presented it as his own accomplishment. The directness of the criticism of his own brother, right there in front of me, was shocking. It also felt incredibly validating. He saw it. He saw the subtle, selfish pattern that had worn me down in the relationship. "You are a quiet person, Eliza," Julian observed, leaning back just enough to break the tense proximity, but the intensity didn't lessen. "You manage to blend in, even when you shouldn't. You have this way of making yourself small. I noticed that at the few family dinners we shared." I recoiled slightly. He noticed. I spent all those evenings trying to be a polite fixture on the edge of the large, overwhelming Vance family circle, trying not to take up too much space. I was supposed to be invisible to him. "I suppose I don't seek attention," I replied stiffly, defensively. "No, you seek peace," Julian corrected, and his observation was so accurate, so sharp, it hit me in the chest. But there's a difference between seeking peace and actively extinguishing your own presence. I gripped the side of the table, suddenly defensive. Was this what he wanted to talk about? My personality flaws? "I'm not sure what this has to do with Ryan's expense reports, Julian." He simply held my gaze. It has everything to do with him. And everything to do with why I asked you to coffee. It wasn't just about his accounts, Eliza. I needed to see you without the noise of my brother in the room. The phrase hung there. I needed to see you. My mind raced, trying to dismiss it. He was just being dramatic. He was a power player, a manipulator of words. But the slight tremor in the hand holding the espresso cup suggested a vulnerability that felt too real for performance. I swallowed hard, the latte suddenly tasteless. This wasn't about Ryan. This was becoming dangerously about us. Julian finally picked up his cup and took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark espresso. The scent of burnt coffee grounds and powerful wealth seemed to mix together. I waited, rigid, terrified of what he might say next. I wanted to run, but my feet were anchored by sheer curiosity. I've spent 20 years building a life that looks impressive from the outside, he began, his voice dropping slightly, forcing me to lean in. The tone wasn't boasting. It was the flat statement of a weary man. Big office, penthouse view, a calendar that requires an executive assistant just to decipher it. You see the surface, the control. You don't see the silence. He paused, glancing out the window at the rain starting to beat on the glass. You think you're good at being small, Eliza? Try being perpetually large. I walk into a room, and people adjust. They assume I want something, or that I'm judging them. No one just sees me. They see the title, the money, the responsibility. The admission hit me with the force of a confession. Julian Vance, the titan of industry, was admitting to a profound, bone-deep loneliness. It was a vulnerability I had never anticipated, especially from a man who seemed to command his own gravity. This wasn't the powerful CEO. This was just Julian, isolated in his success. It's exhausting, he murmured, rubbing the back of his neck with one hand. The tension in the gesture was palpable. The pressure to be right, to be the solution, to always be the one cleaning up. Ryan and we are similar in one way. We both spent our lives trying to meet expectations set impossibly high by my father. Ryan rebelled publicly and destructively. I dealt with it by doubling down on control. My heart ached for the exhausted honesty in his voice. I suddenly understood the pressure I had only seen from the periphery. He wasn't just a rich CEO. He was a man weighed down by decades of systemic responsibility. When I looked at you and Ryan, he continued, meeting my gaze again, his eyes holding a stark honesty, I saw two people trying to navigate life without causing too much trouble. But you were the only one who seemed content in the small, quiet moments. You didn't need validation from the outside world. That was frankly intriguing. He pushed the empty espresso cup away. I'm tired of the noise, Eliza. I'm tired of the performance. And when I saw you today, just sitting here, waiting for me, perfectly contained and quiet, I realized something. You are the only person who has ever seen me as an accessory to their own messy life, as Ryan's girlfriend. And yet, you are the only one who seems to see me as just Julian. He wasn't asking for pity, but he was laying his vulnerability out like a truce offering. The power dynamics had completely flipped. Socially, he still held all the cards. Emotionally, he was suddenly the exposed one. I felt a surge of protectiveness, an impulse to reach across the table and offer him something warm and solid, like my almost cold latte. I just see a man who needs a break, I said quietly, the most honest thing I could offer. He managed a genuine smile then, brief and brittle, but real. Perhaps. Or perhaps I just need a different kind of company. The atmosphere had changed from interrogation to conspiratorial quiet. The initial rush of panic subsided, replaced by a strange, unsettling comfort. We sat there for another half hour, not talking about Ryan, or the company, or anything particularly important. We talked about Seattle's perpetual rain, the impossibility of finding a truly good baguette in the neighborhood, and the strange satisfaction of a perfect early morning commute. It was trivial, yes, but in the context of Julian Vance's life, these small details were revolutionary. He spoke about his routines, his morning swim, the way he organized his desk, all the mundane things that make a person human, not a headline. I found myself matching his rhythm, speaking softly about the pleasure of watching dough rise and the satisfying click of finishing a complex data set. He laughed once, a genuine, chesty sound, when I described a particularly terrible croissant I had tried recently. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the hum of the cafe, and for a fleeting second, he looked incredibly young, rid of the weary weight he usually carried. "You really notice things, don't you, Eliza?" he observed, leaning his elbows on the table, his posture far more relaxed than when he first arrived. "I have to," I admitted, shrugging slightly. "If I don't pay attention to the small details, I miss the whole picture. I'm an analyst. It's habit." "No," he corrected gently. "It's empathy. You notice the things people try to hide." I didn't argue. Maybe he was right. I noticed the way his index finger tapped a quiet, precise rhythm on the tabletop when he was thinking deeply. I noticed the faint scent of sandalwood and leather that clung to his expensive suit. I noticed the relief in his eyes when he talked about something truly insignificant, something that demanded nothing from him. There was no physical contact, no flirtation, no promise exchanged. We were simply two people sharing an intimate, unscripted moment over cooling coffee. It felt like standing in a completely quiet room after months of constant noise, a silent recognition that we were, in different ways, equally tired of the performance demanded by our lives. The moment stretched out, comfortable and complete. I could feel the invisible line that had separated us, CEO and ex-girlfriend, powerful and invisible, blurring into a shared understanding. When he finally looked at his wrist, a subtle, internalized signal that the time was up, I felt a genuine stab of disappointment. "I should go," I said, standing up a little too quickly. Julian stood as well, towering slightly. "Thank you for the information, Eliza, and thank you for the non-work discussion." He didn't offer a handshake, which felt right. A handshake would have been too formal, too much like closing a deal. Instead, he simply met my gaze, holding it just long enough for the message to be clear. The connection wasn't accidental anymore. It was acknowledged. I turned to leave, walking toward the door, trying to recapture the neutrality I had arrived with. But as I reached the exit, I heard him speak. Not loud enough for anyone else to hear, but clearly enough to stop me cold. "Don't disappear again, Eliza. Don't disappear again, Eliza." The phrase echoed in my head as I walked through the damp Seattle air back toward my office building. My focus was shattered. I felt like I was walking on glass, trying desperately to reassemble the smooth, predictable surface of my life. I couldn't just not disappear. I had to. It was the only way to keep things safe. The rational part of my brain, the analyst, was screaming about boundaries and protocol. This was Julian Vance. This was Ryan's older brother. This was the man who had paid for half the dinners I attended while dating his sibling. The complexity of the situation wasn't just professional or social. It was fundamentally taboo. It felt like a moral hazard. What would Ryan say? Even if we were long broken up, the idea of pursuing anything, even just a friendship with Julian, felt like a betrayal of some unwritten code of familial conduct. Ryan was volatile. If he found out, he would make a scene, drag Julian into unnecessary drama, and possibly jeopardize Julian's already strained position as the family savior. I had spent 6 months carefully building my walls higher, valuing stability and quiet above all else. Engaging with Julian Vance was the very definition of instability. He was a vortex of powerful energy, and I was just trying to keep my small boat afloat. Even if he was lonely, even if he saw me, I couldn't risk the fallout. I reached the lobby of my building and punched the elevator button, my mind a churning mess of risk assessments. If I let this connection continue, what was the best-case scenario? A complicated, scrutinized relationship with a man whose life was constantly in the spotlight. The worst-case scenario? Public gossip, professional awkwardness, and the complete destruction of the carefully managed peace I had established. No. I needed to recede. I decided right there in the elevator. I would send Julian a short, polite email thanking him for the coffee, affirming that I was happy to help with Ryan's remaining logistics, and then I would put a period on the interaction. I would be kind, but firm. I would choose self-preservation. I was reaching for my office keys when my phone buzzed. It was a text, not an email, and not about Ryan. Julian, I know you're trying to figure out how to politely distance yourself. Don't. The clarity of his perception startled me so completely that I dropped my keys. How could he know? He had read the exact calculation happening in my head, the moral struggle, the immediate retreat. It was unnerving, powerful, and utterly captivating. He saw not just my smallness, but my strategy for retreat. I picked up the keys, my hands actually shaking now. He wasn't just observing. He was actively anticipating my defensive moves. He wasn't letting me go back into the dark. I had to respond. I couldn't just vanish after that. I typed back, forcing my fingers to stay steady. You shouldn't assume what I'm thinking. The reply was instantaneous. I'm not assuming, Eliza. I'm hoping. And I need to talk to you about something important tonight. Something that has nothing to do with Ryan. The tension ratcheted up another notch. My resolution to retreat was already crumbling, dissolved by the sheer force of his intentional pursuit. I knew, with a sinking feeling, that I was about to agree to break every rule I had set for myself. I agreed to meet him at a discreet wine bar near his office building at 8. I couldn't concentrate for the rest of the workday. Spreadsheets blurred into chaotic grids, and I kept replaying his last text, the deliberate challenge to my self-imposed isolation. He knew my fear, and instead of backing off, he was demanding I confront it. When I arrived at the wine bar, Julian was already there, tucked away in a dimly lit booth. He stood when I approached, a gesture of old-world courtesy that felt strangely intimate. I ordered a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, something crisp, something that might steady my nerves. We navigated a few minutes of polite small talk, but the underlying tension was too thick to ignore. I looked at the dark, rich wood of the table, avoiding his gaze, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the real reason he had insisted on this meeting. Eliza, he finally said, resting his hand near my glass. He didn't touch me, but the proximity of his warmth was an electric boundary I couldn't ignore. I need to be absolutely candid with you, because I won't allow you to hide behind excuses anymore. My breath hitched. Julian, if this is about Ryan, I really can't. It is entirely about you. He cut me off, his voice firm but not raised. He leaned in across the table. I told you I asked you to coffee because I needed to see you outside of Ryan's context. That was a half-truth. The full truth is, I've been trying to justify this interaction for 6 months. I stared at him, my wine forgotten. Justify what? My interest in you, he clarified, his eyes unwavering. The fact that even when you were with my brother, I found myself looking for you in a room. You were quiet, yes, but you weren't blending in for me. I saw your patience, your meticulous care in handling Ryan's chaos, and I saw the quiet strength that kept you from becoming one of his problems. The sheer admission of surveillance, that he had been watching me, assessing me, even while I was dating his brother, was overwhelming. It felt like every careful attempt I made at invisibility had been completely undermined by his laser-like focus. He took a slow breath, his confession gathering weight. Ryan never appreciated the quiet complexity of who you are. He only saw a distraction or a resource. But I watched you, Eliza. I watched you leave his apartment after a fight, head held high, carrying a small paper bag of your fresh-baked bread, choosing dignity over drama. I saw the relief in your eyes when you broke up with him, even though you tried to hide it. Tears pricked at my eyes. No one, not even my closest friends, had ever articulated the internal narrative of my relationship with Ryan so clearly. Julian looked directly into my soul, and then he said the one line that shattered every defense mechanism I had built since childhood, the line that crossed the irreversible line between acquaintance and something forbidden and profound. I don't just see you, Eliza. I see what you need, and I want to be the man who gives it to you. That peace you crave, I want to share mine with you. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a promise of recognition, a covenant of stillness. He wasn't offering me luxury or passion. He was offering the rarest thing he owned, his controlled, quiet sanctuary. My mouth was dry. The clatter of ice in someone else's glass nearby sounded impossibly loud. I felt exposed, seen in a way that was terrifyingly beautiful. I wanted to believe him, but years of guarding my heart made the admission nearly impossible. I don't know what to say, Julian, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. This is insane. You're Ryan's brother. You are my former boss's boss. The logistics alone are impossible. The drama. I thrive on not having drama. Julian nodded slowly, accepting my fear without argument. I know the complications. I am aware of the optics. And I am asking you to set them aside for one moment, to acknowledge what is true. I am not asking you to make any commitments tonight, Eliza. I am asking you if you feel what I feel. This intense recognition. This silence between us that is louder than any conversation I have with anyone else. I felt the blood rush to my head. He wasn't demanding. He wasn't pressuring. He was simply stating a shared truth and asking me to validate it. The fear was still a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now laced with an undeniable, intoxicating rush of hope. I'm terrified, I admitted, my voice barely audible. I spent so long trying to be invisible to avoid chaos. This is the definition of chaos, Julian. And yet, he prompted softly, his gaze gentle. And yet, I repeated, gathering my internal resources. When you said you saw me, I felt a shift, like I could finally stop bracing for impact. I've never had that before. I've always been preparing for the next disappointment. I lifted my eyes to meet his, making my choice visible. It wasn't a brave move. It was a deeply honest one. It was the choice to stop denying a truth that had been quietly building between us for years. I can't promise you no drama, I said, a slight tremor running through my hands. I can't promise you that this won't blow up in our faces, but I can promise you that I felt the silence in the coffee shop, and I feel the tension here. I won't lie and say I didn't notice. Julian reached across the table, not to take my hand, but to gently place his palm flat on the wood near mine. The gap remained, but the intent was clear. Good, he said, the single word rich with a depth of feeling I hadn't expected. We start there. We start with the truth. We start with the fact that I want to know more about the person who can bake a legendary carrot cake and prefers to spend Tuesday nights alone analyzing spreadsheets. He wasn't trying to change me. He was choosing the quiet, complicated reality of Eliza. And in that moment, the moral conflict retreated. It was still there, but the emotional imperative was stronger. I made the choice to step out of the invisibility I had so carefully constructed. I chose the risk of being seen by Julian Vance. We didn't linger at the wine bar. The intense conversation required a change of scenery. a decompression. Julian paid the bill, and we stepped back out into the cool evening air. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflecting the city lights in long, distorted smears. He didn't suggest going back to his place or mine. Instead, we started walking, just aimlessly strolling down a quieter street away from the main thoroughfare. The change of pace was exactly what was needed, a shared momentum without a defined destination. It felt like moving forward, physically and emotionally. We talked about everything and nothing. I asked him about the pressure of the CEO role, and he described it not with pride, but with the measured weariness of a captain who never leaves the bridge. He asked me about my favorite old book, and I realized he was testing the boundaries of my small, quiet world, not trying to dismantle it, but trying to fit himself inside it. The silence between us now was different from the one in the cafe. It wasn't the silence of unspoken tension. It was the comfortable quiet of two people who had decided to share a wavelength. My heart rate had slowed from a frantic scramble to a steady, hopeful beat. The decision was made. The danger was acknowledged. Now, we were just navigating the new reality. We stopped near a small closed park. Julian turned to me, his hands tucked into the pockets of his tailored trousers. "I know this is complicated, Eliza. I know this is a risk for both of us. But I won't pretend I haven't been waiting for the right opportunity to talk to you like this since the first day I saw you standing awkwardly at one of Ryan's terrible holiday parties." "I was awkward," I confirmed, smiling faintly. "I didn't want to break anything." "You never break things," Julian assured me. "You fix them quietly. And I need a lot of quiet fixing." He still hadn't touched me, but the connection felt more real, more grounded than any physical touch could have provided. It was a mutual agreement to explore an impossible necessary truth. We were taking the very first, tentative step into a space that neither of us had intended to occupy. "Where do we go from here, Julian?" I asked, looking up at the sky, the clouds finally starting to break up. He didn't offer a grand plan. He offered presence. We continue walking. We continue talking. We take the next right turn and see where it leads. It was an open ending, a deliberate refusal to impose a rigid structure on something fragile and new. It was a beautiful, terrifying way to begin. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Ryan's inevitable discovery, the workplace gossip, the monumental gap between our lives. But tonight, standing under the diffused glow of the streetlights, Julian Vance saw me, and I chose to be seen. If you loved witnessing this quiet breakthrough, this forbidden moment where vulnerability outweighed reputation, hit the like button and subscribe. Did Eliza make the right choice? Or is getting involved with Julian Vance the ultimate self-sabotage? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of the stories that shouldn't happen, but always do.